Picture this, pitch black, not the comfortable kind, but the kind that swallows you whole. The wind's howling like a banshee, and you're perched atop a rickety tower, bow in hand. You're an ordinary archer, tasked with keeping watch as everyone else sleeps soundly in their beds. But tonight, something feels different. A shadow moves in the tree line. Is it a bandit, a wild animal, or something far more sinister, something whispered about in hushed tones around the tavern fire? Tonight, we're leaving the grand castles and the noble knights behind. We're diving into the cold, lonely reality of the medieval night watch, as experienced by a typical archer. Forget your romantic notions of chivalry, because today we're talking about survival. We're exploring the dangers lurking in the dark, the constant fear, and the incredible responsibility placed on the shoulders of these forgotten guardians of the realm. So grab your cloak, sharpen your arrows, and prepare for a long, dark night as we delve into the world of the medieval archer's vigil. Imagine, if you will, the profound silence of a medieval night. It's not the silence we know today, occasionally punctuated by the distant hum of traffic or the glow of a street lamp filtering through curtains. This was an absolute suffocating kind of darkness, so complete it felt like a physical presence, wrapping itself around the world. Without the ubiquitous light pollution we take for granted, the stars above would have been a dazzling, almost overwhelming spectacle, yet below, the world was a void. In this world defined by darkness and the potential for chaos, the archer's role transcended that of a mere warrior of daylight. When the sun dipped below the horizon, they didn't just lay down their arms, they transformed into sentinels against the unseen terrors of the night. Their weapon, so precise and deadly in the sun, became a tool of vigilance, less about pinpoint accuracy and more about deterrence and the psychological edge. As a guardian of life and property, the archer stood on the very edge of the known world, separating the warmth and safety of the village or castle from the unforgiving wilderness that lay beyond. Inside the walls, families slept, children dreamt, and the rhythms of life continued, oblivious to the silent vigil above. Outside, the vast, untamed expanse held not only wild beasts, but also the ever-present threat of human malice, raiders, invaders, or simply those who wished ill upon the settled communities. Each moment of watch was a conscious, deliberate act of holding the line, a testament to their unwavering commitment to protect, ensuring that when the sun eventually rose, it would greet a community still safe, still intact, still dreaming. Imagine standing for hours on end, exposed to the elements, the biting wind or the relentless boredom, your muscles aching from the constant, subtle tension of readiness, your eyes strained from scanning the horizon for any hint of movement, any flicker of an anomaly in an otherwise unchanging landscape. It's a silent vigil, often performed in isolation, where your only company is the vast expanse before you and the rhythmic thump of your own heart. Sentinels don't just hear, they dissect sound. They learn to interpret the texture of silence, to sense the vacuum where a natural sound should be, but isn't. This acute listening isn't a gift, it's a skill forged in the crucible of necessity. Hours spent motionless, every nerve-ending tuned, every muscle coiled, transforms the human ear into an incredibly sophisticated instrument. They can pinpoint the exact direction of a sound, its distance, its trajectory. Is that rustle a badger foraging or a person crawling? The difference between the two is subtle, but life-altering. They can distinguish the weight of a footfall, the rhythm of a breath, the minute creak of equipment. They can tell if a distant dog bark is a genuine territorial challenge or a prearranged signal. Every night on watch is a masterclass in auditory forensics. Their lives, and the lives of the entire encampment, depend on their ability to detect the merest anomaly, to hear the whisper of danger long before it makes itself known to the unprepared eye. It's a constant state of hyper-awareness, a quiet vigil where the absence of a sound can be just as alarming as its presence. Once an anomaly is registered, the challenge shifts from detection to communication. In the profound stillness of night, shouting is an invitation to disaster. This is where a sentinel's other critical skill comes into play, the silent language of the watch. It's a complex tapestry of nonverbal cues, often so subtle that an untrained observer would miss it entirely. A carefully placed series of taps on a tree trunk, a specific bird call mimicked with uncanny accuracy, but subtly off-key enough to signal an alert, or even a nuanced shift in body posture visible only to a fellow watcher across the gloom. These aren't random gestures, they're a rigorously trained lexicon, a secret code understood by every member of the watch. A short, sharp click of the tongue might mean danger approaching from the west, slow. A longer, drawn-out whistle, a mimicry of a nightingale, could signify patrol route clear, proceed. The precision is paramount. A misinterpretation could spell catastrophe. It's a testament to their coordinated vigilance, a symphony of shadows and whispers, where complex messages are conveyed with minimal disturbance. It's an unspoken pact, a shared understanding that binds them together against the encroaching darkness, ensuring that information flows like a silent current, protecting those who sleep unaware. The medieval world was a harsh canvas, painted with the stark realities of war, famine, and disease. In a way, though, the watch is part of a larger story, which goes back even further than that, which we can trace through the story of the archer's bow. Imagine our earliest ancestors, perhaps grabbing a fallen branch, sharpening one end against a rock, and suddenly holding not just a stick, but an extension of their will, a tool for survival. This primitive spear, a mere elongated piece of wood, was the genesis of a process that would continue until the present day, the refinement of our weapons. Over countless millennia, the basic concept of that spear underwent an incredible transformation, evolving from a simple hunting implement to a sophisticated, deadly armament. We moved from the handheld thrusting spear to the javelin that could be hurled with surprising force, and eventually to the arrow, a projectile engineered with a precision that belies its ancient origins. Each iteration, each subtle adjustment to its length, its weight, its balance, and especially its fletching, represented a continuous refinement. The choice of wood, the shaping of the point, whether stone, bone, or later metal, these were not arbitrary decisions, but rather the result of generations of experimentation and learning, aimed at maximizing speed, penetration, and accuracy. The shaft itself became a complex piece of engineering, an aerodynamic marvel designed to deliver its payload with devastating efficiency. This continuous refinement paved the way for a remarkable resurgence of the bow's importance, particularly in European warfare, ushering in an era from the High Middle Ages that fundamentally reshaped battlefields. Before this period, melee combat often dominated, with heavy infantry and cavalry clashing in brutal close-quarters engagements. But with the widespread adoption and development of weapons like the English longbow and various forms of crossbows, the dynamics of conflict shifted dramatically. Suddenly, armies could inflict significant damage from a distance, raining down thousands of projectiles that could pierce even hardened armor, demoralize enemy ranks, and break formations before they ever reached hand-to-hand combat. The sheer volume and lethality of these arrow storms were unprecedented. Battles like Crécy and Agincourt serve as stark reminders of how a well-trained, disciplined corps of archers could decimate much larger, heavily armored forces, demonstrating the strategic power of a weapon system centered around a precisely engineered shaft. It wasn't just about the arrow, it was about the collective impact of thousands of arrows, turning open fields into killing zones and forcing military commanders to completely rethink their strategies, their armor, and their approach to siege warfare. When we talk about ancient and medieval warfare, few weapons evoke as much respect and awe as the bow. But it wasn't just one weapon, it was a family of instruments, each with its own story, its own set of demands, and its own place on the battlefield. Take, for instance, the legendary English longbow. This wasn't just a simple stick and string, it was a formidable piece of engineering, albeit a seemingly primitive one. Its power was immense, capable of piercing through plate armor at closer ranges, and causing devastating impact even when it didn't fully penetrate. The sheer kinetic energy unleashed by a well-drawn longbow was truly terrifying. Its range was equally impressive, allowing archers to rain down arrows from hundreds of yards away, disrupting enemy formations long before they could engage in hand-to-hand combat. But the longbow's true legend lies in the immense skill required to wield it effectively. We're talking about draw weights often exceeding 100 pounds, sometimes even 150 pounds. This wasn't something you picked up in a weekend. It demanded a lifetime of dedication, starting from childhood. Archers trained relentlessly, building incredible upper body strength, developing calloused fingers, and mastering the precise form that allowed them to loose arrows with accuracy and speed. They were highly specialized, highly valued soldiers, and their prowess shaped the outcomes of battles like Crécy and Agincourt, leaving an indelible mark on military history. Then we shift our gaze to its contemporary, the crossbow. In many ways, the crossbow was the antithesis of the longbow, yet equally revolutionary. While the longbow demanded years of strength and technique, the crossbow offered a mechanical advantage. It utilized a crank, or a lever mechanism, to draw back an incredibly powerful bowstring, which was then held in place by a locking mechanism. This meant that the user didn't need immense physical strength at the point of release. They just needed to pull a trigger. Consequently, the training required to become proficient with a crossbow was significantly less demanding. A soldier could be taught the basics of loading, aiming, and firing a crossbow in a matter of weeks or months, compared to the years required for a longbowman. This made the crossbow a weapon for the masses, easily deployable in large numbers. Its distinct tactical applications shone in sustained fire situations, particularly in siege warfare or from defensive positions. While slower to reload than a longbow, its bolts, often heavier and smaller, could deliver a powerful, precise punch, making it excellent for targeting specific individuals or vulnerabilities in enemy lines. It changed the dynamic of battle by allowing less physically imposing soldiers to deliver lethal force over distance, democratizing archery in a way the longbow never could. It's easy to look at an arrow and see just a simple projectile, a stick, a point, some feathers. But beneath that apparent simplicity lies a profound depth of craftsmanship and tailored lethality. The very word fletching speaks to this intricacy, referring to the delicate artistry of attaching feathers to the arrow shaft, meticulously angled to impart a spin. This spin ensures aerodynamic stability, making the arrow fly true, a critical factor when a miss could mean your life. The real story of an arrow's intent, however, often begins at its very tip. Consider the bodkin point. Small, pyramidal, or needle-like. This wasn't designed for broad, messy wounds, but as an armor piercer, a specialized tool for punching through mail or finding weaknesses in plate, allowing the shaft to deliver its grim payload. Then there's the broadhead, a far more menacing prospect for the unarmored. With its wide, razor-sharp blades, often barbed, the broadhead was engineered for maximum tissue damage, creating large, gaping wounds that bled profusely, quickly incapacitating a target. It was the preferred choice for hunting large game, and equally devastating against exposed flesh on a battlefield. And finally, the humble blunt or practice point, often just a thickened, rounded piece of wood or metal, used for training, stunning small game, or demonstrating accuracy without bloodshed. Each arrowhead was a deliberate choice, reflecting the target and the tactical philosophy. However, even the most perfectly crafted arrow is useless without a steady supply. An archer is only as effective as their ammunition reserves. Imagine a sustained engagement, thousands of arrows arcing through the sky. Ensuring a constant provision was a logistical nightmare and a critical supply chain challenge for any military force. Arrows weren't mass-produced, they were the product of dedicated artisans, fletchers meticulously building them, often travelling with the army, setting up workshops on site to constantly replenish stocks. The raw materials, shafts from specific woods, precisely trimmed feathers, metal for the heads, were a significant undertaking. Each arrow had to be consistent in weight, balance, and straightness to ensure accuracy. Transporting these delicate yet essential projectiles required specialized wagons and careful handling. A disrupted arrow supply could cripple an army's ranged capabilities, making it a prime target for enemy interception. The continuous flow of arrows from workshop to battlefield was as vital as food and water. Once made and delivered, these precious projectiles needed to be carried in a way that offered both protection and immediate access. This is where the quiver steps in, an often underestimated piece of equipment. Far from being a mere holder, A well-designed quiver was essential for an archer's effectiveness. Constructed from durable materials like hardened leather or wood, quivers came in various forms. The classic image of a back quiver slung over the shoulder is iconic, allowing for a good number of arrows. But equally common, and often more practical for rapid firing, were hip quivers, worn at the side, presenting the fletched ends within easy reach for a quick draw. Some archers even used ground quivers, essentially stands driven into the earth near a stationary position, allowing a large number of arrows to be laid out for rapid, continuous firing. The internal design was crucial, ensuring the fletching was protected while keeping arrows separated and untangled. This delicate balance, securing arrows without rattling, yet allowing smooth, silent retrieval, was key. Beyond the individual, armies also transported arrows in large bundles or specialized chests, ready for distribution to frontline archers by arrow boys or ammunition carriers. These carrying methods were not just convenience, they were integral components of a system designed to maintain a relentless barrage. The journey to becoming a master bowman was rarely a casual pursuit. For many, it began in childhood, an inherited tradition or an early fascination that blossomed into a lifelong commitment. Imagine a young hand, perhaps barely strong enough to hold a toy, then graduating to a small training bow, learning the foundational stance and grip long before true power was a consideration. It wasn't about immediate results, but about slow, methodical immersion. Years would pass, marked by countless hours of nocking arrows, drawing strings and releasing with a focus that bordered on meditation. This wasn't merely acquiring a skill, it was an integration, a shaping of the body and mind around the instrument. The longbow became an extension of the individual, its very feel and balance becoming as familiar as their own heartbeat. This deep embedding meant that by the time adulthood arrived, the movements were no longer conscious efforts, but instinctive reflexes, a deeply ingrained muscle memory that allowed for precision even under duress. It was a silent language spoken between the archer and their weapon, forged in the crucible of dedication. But dedication alone, however profound, couldn't defy the physical realities of the warbow. These weren't sporting implements. They were engines of incredible kinetic energy, demanding immense physical conditioning from their wielders. We're talking about bows with draw weights that could easily exceed 100 pounds, some rumoured to be closer to 200. To pull such a weapon to full draw consistently and with control required a transformation of the human physique. It wasn't just brute arm strength, it was a sophisticated development of the entire upper body, particularly the back and shoulders. The latissimus dorsi, the rhomboids, the deltoids, these muscles became ropey and powerful, sculpted by the relentless repetition of drawing and holding. Core strength was paramount too, stabilizing the body against the immense torque. Imagine the strain, the burning ache, the deliberate strengthening of tendons and ligaments to withstand such forces. Every fiber of their being was honed, not for a fleeting moment of power, but for sustained exertion, shot after shot. The bowman's posture, their gait, even the breadth of their shoulders would betray their demanding craft, their body itself becoming a testament to the heavy demands of their chosen weapon. Raw strength and ingrained technique, while vital, were still only part of the equation. To truly master the longbow meant transforming that brute force into deadly precision, and that came through endless drills and target practice. This wasn't just about hitting a stationary bullseye on a calm day. Bowmen were put through rigorous paces, designed to hone accuracy, speed, and consistency under a myriad of challenging conditions. They practiced rapid nocking and firing, perhaps emptying a quiver in mere seconds, each arrow a deliberate strike. They shot at moving targets, simulating fleeing game or an advancing enemy, forcing them to lead and anticipate. Practice included shooting from various distances, adjusting for wind, elevation, and even the subtle fatigue that crept in after a dozen heavy draws. They learned to compensate for the weight of armor, the awkwardness of uneven terrain, the reduced visibility of dusk or dawn. The goal was consistency, to make every shot feel identical, to eliminate variability, to transform the chaotic variables of battle into predictable outcomes. This relentless pursuit of perfection, the constant feedback loop of release, flight, and impact, forged the bowman into an instrument of unparalleled precision, a human catapult capable of delivering devastating power with surgical accuracy. It's easy to overly romanticize the image of the medieval archer, but beyond the legend lies a stark physical reality, the sheer, unyielding strength required just to draw the string. We're not talking about a lightweight recreational bow. Ancient war bows like the English longbow often boasted draw weights exceeding 100 pounds. Imagine trying to lift a small grown man with one hand, or bench pressing a substantial weight. Now imagine doing that not once, but repeatedly in rapid succession for extended periods. This wasn't merely an arm exercise. Drawing a heavy war bow engaged the entire kinetic chain. The powerful muscles of the back, particularly the latissimus dorsi and rhomboids, stabilizing the shoulders, the core, bracing against the immense tension, and even the legs, providing a solid foundation and transmitting power upwards. It was a full-body commitment, a profound display of functional strength that few modern athletes could replicate without specialized training. This wasn't about looking strong, it was about generating lethal force consistently. The ability to control and release that much stored energy demanded a level of physical prowess that set these individuals apart, truly marking them as highly specialized warriors. This incredible strength, however, came at a cost. The repetitive, high-impact nature of drawing such immense weights day after day, year after year, exacted a tremendous toll on the archer's body. Specific physical ailments became almost a professional hazard. Think of the shoulders, particularly the rotator cuffs, subjected to immense strain with each draw and release, leading to inflammation, tears, and chronic pain. Elbows could develop conditions akin to what we now call archer's elbow or golfer's elbow, a persistent agony from tendon overuse. The spine, too, endured constant compression and twisting forces, contributing to back pain and structural imbalances. This relentless training also sculpted a very particular physique. Rather than a symmetrical bodybuilder's frame, a master archer would often exhibit significant muscular asymmetry. The drawing arm and shoulder would be noticeably more developed, with hypertrophied back muscles, a powerful scapular region, and a robust chest on the drawing side. Their non-drawing arm, while strong for stability and bow control, would be less massive. It was a body forged not for aesthetics, but for a singular, demanding purpose, a living testament to their arduous craft, often bearing the scars of their dedication in the form of chronic aches and limited range of motion in later life. Yet, despite all that, the archer's work was often less about furious sprints and more about grinding marathons of waiting. Imagine a long watch perched high on a rampart or concealed in a thicket, hour after hour stretching into an eternity. Here, the true enemy isn't a charging horde, but boredom, cold, gnawing fatigue, and the insidious whispers of self-doubt. The sun climbs, then dips, stars wheel, and still nothing. The mind naturally seeks to wander, muscles ache from holding position, and environmental sounds become a hypnotic drone, threatening dangerous complacency. This sustained focus resisting the urge to simply switch off is an enduring psychological test. A moment of inattention, a fleeting lapse, could mean missing the telltale glint of an enemy patrol, or overlooking a subtle shift that heralds danger. Lives, and perhaps a campaign's fate, could hinge on maintaining a sharp, engaged mind through those slow, uneventful hours. This is a quiet war waged entirely within one's own skull, demanding a stamina of spirit often overlooked. The archer doesn't just wait, they actively perceive, constantly scanning, listening, processing every minor shift, ready to transition from passive observation to decisive action. Beyond the raw courage and sustained vigilance lies the intellectual acrobatics, the split-second calculations underpinning every successful shot. A historical archer lacked rangefinders. Their brain was the supercomputer, processing a complex array of variables instantly. Each arrow they shot was a visible manifestation of lightning-fast calculation, a blend of environmental awareness and learned intuition, culminating in that singular deadly flight. The archers who mastered these skills were also, in a sense, a part of a team. For example, Beneath the iconic figure of the armoured knight, or perhaps more accurately, alongside and even ahead of him, stood another crucial player, the archer. These were not the landed gentry, rarely bearing the titles or the family crests of the knightly class. Their societal status was a fascinating blend, often fluctuating between that of the independent yeoman farmer, bound by duty and community, and the more rootless mercenary, selling his deadly skill to the highest bidder. A yeoman archer might own his small parcel of land, contributing to the local militia or responding to a royal summons, bringing his hard-won expertise to the battlefield as part of his obligation. He was a free man, a valued member of his village, but his military service was distinctly separate from the inherited honour of a knight. On the other hand, the mercenary archer was a professional soldier, his bow and quiver his entire livelihood, moving from conflict to conflict, lord to lord, always seeking the next engagement. Their position was one of respect for their skill, but perhaps less for their social standing. They were the practical, vital muscle of the army, a testament to raw ability over aristocratic birthright, and their very existence highlighted a growing social mobility within the stratified world of the Middle Ages. The life of an archer, whether yeoman or mercenary, was one of specialized skill, yet it was also profoundly precarious. The economic incentives were clear enough. For a man without land or title, the bow offered a path to a livelihood, sometimes a decent wage, and the prospect of spoils after a successful campaign. For a yeoman, it could be a crucial supplement to the often lean income from farming, a way to secure a future for his family through service. But these incentives were balanced by profound dangers. The battlefield was a brutal place, and archers, while often positioned behind defensive stakes or obstacles, were far from immune to the savagery of close combat if a line broke or a charge reached them. Injury, disease, and death were constant companions. Beyond the immediate perils of war, there was the constant economic instability. Peace treaties, while welcome for their end to bloodshed, often meant unemployment for professional archers, leaving them adrift with little in the way of a safety net. Maintaining their expensive equipment, from bows to quivers to arrows, was a continuous financial drain. This was not a profession for the faint of heart or the financially imprudent. It demanded constant training, discipline, and a willingness to face the unpredictable tides of both war and peace. Yet, despite these challenges, archers evolved into an absolutely crucial, specialized component of medieval armies, irrevocably changing the dynamics of warfare and the composition of military forces. Their ability to deliver a devastating volume of projectiles at range transformed battlefields. No longer was a charge of heavy cavalry an unassailable force. Now, they had to endure a literal storm of arrows designed to disrupt their formations, fell their horses, and pierce their armor before they even reached the enemy line. This wasn't merely about numerical strength, it was about precision, training, and the understanding of trajectory and wind. Becoming proficient with a longbow, for instance, required years of dedicated practice, building immense upper body strength and an almost instinctive eye for distance. This specialization meant that armies became more sophisticated, moving beyond simple feudal levies. Instead, they incorporated dedicated units of professional archers, whose tactical deployment could often decide the outcome of major engagements, as famously demonstrated at Crécy or Agincourt. This shift didn't just alter how battles were fought, it democratized warfare to some extent, allowing the skill of a commoner to wield an influence that could challenge, and sometimes even overcome, the brute force and inherited privilege of the knightly class. The archer, the artisan of war, became an indispensable agent of military evolution. For centuries, the very backbone of military service was deeply intertwined with the land. Feudal societies operated on a system of obligation, where service in war was a direct exchange for holding land, a duty owed to one's liege lord. When the call to arms went out, it often meant gathering disparate groups, knights with their retinues, yes, but also a significant proportion of peasants and commoners compelled to leave their fields for a season of war. These were temporary forces, assembled for a specific campaign, then largely disbanded. But across certain regions, a quieter, more profound revolution was brewing, reshaping the very fabric of how nations fought. This wasn't about new weapons, at least not initially, but about a fundamental change in manpower. We began to see the emergence of professional standing forces, not men compelled by ancient duties, but individuals who chose war as a profession drawn by the promise of coin. This transition marked a crucial pivot point, moving from a scattered, obligation-based levy to a more cohesive, paid military apparatus. It signaled a growing understanding that consistent, trained manpower offered an undeniable advantage, especially as the nature of warfare itself grew more complex and protracted. This shift underscored a fundamental re-evaluation of military effectiveness, moving beyond sheer numbers to embrace skill and dedication. To truly grasp the significance of this shift, consider the archer's introduction to the scene. Imagine the typical feudal levy, a farmer perhaps, handed a longbow for the first time, or, at best, having some rudimentary experience from hunting. Their training would be minimal, their equipment often subpar, and their discipline under the pressure of battle, frankly, questionable. They might loose a few arrows, but their accuracy, their rate of fire, and their ability to maintain formation under a hail of enemy projectiles would be severely limited. Contrast that with a professional archer, particularly those from regions famed for their skill, like the Welsh or English longbowmen. These weren't conscripts. They were craftsmen of war, often training from boyhood, their bodies sculpted by years of drawing heavy bows, their eyes honed by countless hours of target practice. Their bows were meticulously maintained, their quivers full of purpose-made arrows. When these professionals stood on the battlefield, they weren't just a mass of bodies, they were a precision instrument. Their volleys were devastatingly accurate, their sustained rate of fire an unceasing storm, their ability to follow commands and adapt to changing conditions a testament to their deep-seated expertise. This stark difference in reliability and effectiveness underscored a critical lesson. Expertise, honed through dedication and sustained practice, was an invaluable asset, far superior to sheer numbers alone. It became clear that paying for such skill wasn't an extravagance. It was an investment in victory. The implications of this fundamental transformation rippled far beyond the immediate battlefield. Militarily, it unlocked entirely new strategic possibilities. Commanders could now plan longer campaigns, knowing their forces wouldn't simply melt away when the harvest season arrived. They could undertake more complex maneuvers, relying on the discipline and cohesive training of their professional units. Standing armies meant a state could project power more consistently, deter threats more effectively, and respond to crises with greater speed. The feudal model often meant a lengthy muster period, a vulnerability the professional army mitigated. But the impact wasn't just tactical or strategic. It profoundly reshaped the social fabric of armies themselves. The old hierarchy, dominated by landowning nobles and their peasant levies, began to evolve. A new professional class emerged, soldiers by trade distinct from the landed gentry or the agricultural worker. This created new internal structures, ranks, and a sense of esprit de corps, rooted in shared training and a common identity as warriors for hire. Pay, rather than simply land or duty, became the primary motivator, fostering a different kind of loyalty, one directly to the employing authority, be it a king or a powerful city-state. This shift not only made armies more potent instruments of power, but also laid some of the groundwork for the modern military institutions we recognize today, where skill, training, and professional dedication are paramount. The archers exemplified all this. These weren't just individuals with bows tucked in amongst the spearmen. They were specialized units, meticulously arranged into formations that were often quite distinct from their infantry and cavalry counterparts. This separation wasn't arbitrary. It was born from a deep understanding of how to maximize their unique impact. Archers needed space to draw and loose, a clear line of sight, and protection from direct assault. Their formations, therefore, had to balance these needs, creating a structure that allowed for sustained fire while minimizing their vulnerability. Whether arrayed in long, thin lines to cover a broad front, or clustered in deeper ranks to unleash concentrated barrages, their placement was always a deliberate act of tactical genius, designed to make every arrow count. Maintaining order within these formations, especially amidst the terrifying chaos of battle, was a monumental task. This is where the pivotal roles of captains and standard-bearers came into sharp focus. A captain was more than just a leader. They were the nerve center of their unit, shouting commands over the din, adjusting positions and, crucially, signaling the timing of volleys. The standard-bearer, often positioned prominently, was a visual anchor, a rallying point that allowed archers to maintain their alignment and cohesion, even as dust and smoke obscured their vision. These flags and banners weren't merely symbols. They were vital tools for battlefield communication, ensuring that a unit could operate as a single, coordinated entity. It was through their unwavering presence and clear signals that individual archers, each focused on their own draw and release, could collectively transform their disparate shots into a unified, devastating wave of projectiles. This precise organization allowed for the development of sophisticated tactics specifically designed to maximize the impact of massed archery. It wasn't enough to simply have many archers. They had to fire together, in sequence or in concentrated bursts. Commanders began to understand the power of continuous fire, where one rank would loose while another drew, creating a relentless, unbroken stream of arrows. They learned to concentrate their fire on specific enemy formations, breaking their morale and disrupting their advance long before they could engage in close combat. The psychological impact of facing thousands of arrows descending from the sky, whistling through the air, was often as destructive as the physical wounds they inflicted. It turned the battlefield into a terrifying gauntlet, where the very act of moving forward became an act of sheer will against an unseen, omnipresent threat. This transformation from individual projectiles to a coordinated deluge of arrows was the culmination of organizational discipline and tactical innovation, making archery a true force multiplier on the ancient and medieval battlefields. Imagine, for a moment, the intricate web of command that stretched from the highest lord, perhaps even the king himself, down to the solitary archer shivering on a castle wall during a long, dark watch. This wasn't some loosely organized rabble. It was a meticulously structured system designed for one paramount purpose: to ensure unwavering discipline and the flawless execution of strategic directives. From the monarch's grand vision for the realm's defense, those orders would cascade down through a hierarchy of seasoned generals, battle-hardened captains, and diligent lieutenants. Each layer served as a filter and a conduit, translating overarching goals into actionable tasks, right down to the specific post an archer was assigned, the rotation of the watch, or the precise timing of a patrol. Every individual, from the lowest pikeman to the most decorated knight, understood their place within this formidable structure. It wasn't merely about following orders. It was about embodying a collective will, where individual actions, however small, contributed to the larger, overarching security of the stronghold. The strength of this chain wasn't just in its length, but in the unwavering loyalty and understanding that bound each link together, guaranteeing that a king's distant command could manifest as immediate vigilance on a remote battlement, bridging the crucial gap between the abstract commands of the high brass and the tangible realities on the ground were the sergeants and corporals. These were the true workhorses of the military structure, the hands-on managers who lived and breathed the daily grind with their soldiers. It was their responsibility to manage the intricate dance of the night watch, assigning shifts, ensuring every sentry was alert, checking on patrols and verifying that equipment was in order. A good sergeant knew every soldier under his command by name, understood their strengths and weaknesses, and could spot the first signs of fatigue or flagging morale. Beyond the watch, these non-commissioned officers were the primary trainers, patiently drilling recruits in the fundamentals of combat, the proper handling of their weapons, and the critical importance of vigilance. They were the immediate authority, the first point of contact for problems, and the frontline solution providers, indispensable for turning strategy into practical, effective defense. In the crucible of a long, cold night watch, effective leadership transcended mere rank. It became an absolute necessity for both morale and operational efficiency. The psychological toll of darkness, isolation, and the constant threat of the unknown could be immense. A strong leader could alleviate much of this stress. Soldiers needed to know that their superiors were competent, would make sound judgments, and wouldn't needlessly risk their lives. Conversely, poor leadership, marked by indecisiveness, favoritism, or a lack of care, could quickly erode trust, breed resentment, and turn a disciplined unit into a fractious, ineffective one. In essence, the quality of leadership determined whether a night watch was merely endured or truly commanded. And the castle where these night watches took place required upkeep too. Imagine waking up to the sounds of practical life, the clatter of pots from the kitchen, the distant shouts of men at drill, the creak of a wagon wheel on cobblestones. This was a place where ordinary people, soldiers, craftsmen, and servants alike, simply lived their lives, albeit under the constant subtle shadow of potential conflict. While active combat might have been sporadic, the demands of maintaining a massive defensive structure were relentless. There was always something that needed doing. Walls required patching, gates needed oiling, and the sheer logistics of feeding and housing hundreds of people demanded constant effort. Guard duty, for instance, wasn't just about standing dramatically on a rampart. It was hours of monotonous vigilance, enduring the biting cold or the oppressive heat, eyes scanning horizons that rarely offered more than passing clouds or distant trees. Then there were the chores, hauling water from the well, chopping firewood, mending tattered uniforms, cleaning weapons until they gleamed, tending to the horses and other vital livestock. Even minor skirmishes, often just patrols encountering bandits or rival scouts, were a continuous low-level drain of energy and a constant reminder of the ever-present danger. Life within the castle was a perpetual cycle of preparedness, a state of readiness that never truly relaxed, even in times of peace. This cycle was underpinned by a strict military discipline, a framework that organized every moment from dawn until dusk. Bugles or bells dictated waking, eating, training, and sleeping. Obedience to command was paramount, structuring the hierarchy of daily interactions. Yet even within these strictures, there were periods of relative inactivity, stretches of quiet boredom that contrasted sharply with moments of intense life-or-death action. Soldiers filled this downtime in various ways, gambling with dice, sharpening their skills with a whetstone, swapping stories around a sputtering fire, or simply cleaning their gear for the 10th time that week. This unique blend of rigid routine and stretches of idleness forged a particular kind of daily rhythm, shaping the soldier's temperament and camaraderie. It was in these quiet moments, punctuated by the occasional alarm or patrol, that the true character of castle cohabitation, a robust resilience born of shared experience and endless waiting, was truly formed. During times of peace, we can imagine all this as relatively calm. During war, however, the intensity increased, and the most intense time of all for those manning the castle happened during a siege. Archery didn't just a supporting role in this, it was a leading player, a critical instrument for both the besieger and the besieged. It shaped the very landscape of a siege, determining where and when assaults could be made and how effectively defences could hold. From the attacking side, archers provided the constant nagging pressure that wore down defenders. Their primary mission was often disruption, and few targets were more critical than enemy sappers. These engineers, tirelessly undermining walls or digging tunnels beneath them, were incredibly vulnerable. Exposed in ditches or under hastily constructed shelters, they presented a clear target. A well-placed volley of arrows could halt their progress, wound vital personnel, or even ignite their timber supports, buying precious time for the besieged. Similarly, targeting defenders on the walls was a continuous, brutal exchange. Attacking archers aimed to suppress their counterparts, thinning their ranks and creating temporary lulls that allowed other siege units, like ladder teams or ram crews, to advance with slightly less danger. And then there were the siege engines themselves. While massive projectiles might bring down walls, archers could pepper the crews of catapults and trebuchets, attempting to disrupt their loading and firing cycles, or even trying to ignite the wooden frameworks with incendiary arrows, turning the attacker's own tools against them. On the defensive side, the castle itself became an extension of the archer's weapon. Medieval architects weren't just building walls, they were designing complex, multi-layered kill zones. The arrow slit, or embrasure, is perhaps the most iconic example. Narrow on the outside to offer maximum protection to the archer, it widened dramatically inwards, allowing for a broad field of fire. This ingenious design meant an archer could loose dozens of arrows while presenting little more than a sliver of their body to the enemy, turning a dangerous exchange into a calculated advantage. Beyond the walls themselves, features like murder holes offered a terrifying surprise. Positioned above gateways or narrow passages, these openings allowed defenders to rain down arrows, stones, boiling liquids, or even heavier projectiles directly onto attackers who had managed to breach the initial defences, trapping them in a deadly choke point. Machicolations, those projecting battlements with floor openings, served a similar purpose, allowing vertical fire straight down onto attackers at the very base of the wall, a spot otherwise shielded from direct missile fire. These architectural innovations didn't just passively protect, they actively amplified the archer's lethality, transforming static stone into a dynamic, aggressive instrument of defense. It was a constant, grueling ballet of projectile warfare, where every arrow loosed could mean the difference between holding a position or seeing it fall. Archers weren't restricted to castles, however. They had many opportunities to hone their skills. In the field, commanders would strategically position their bowmen, sometimes on the flanks to pour fire into exposed sides, or more commonly, in a formidable line directly in front of heavier infantry. This wasn't just about launching projectiles, it was about creating a tactical screen, a living curtain of death. It forced the enemy to either halt, exposing themselves, or push through a relentless hailstorm of shafts. Imagine being a foot soldier, marching steadily, seeing not your opponent's faces yet, but a dark cloud forming, slowly tilting towards you. The air would hum, a precursor to a rain promising pain and disruption. This initial barrage wasn't always about fatal blows. It was about disorienting, wounding, breaking formation, and eroding resolve. It was a brutal introduction to battle, designed to sap strength and courage from even seasoned warriors. And then came the arrow storm, an experience almost impossible to truly convey with words. This wasn't just a few arrows. This was thousands, tens of thousands, launched in volley after devastating volley. Picture the sky itself seeming to darken, not from clouds, but from the sheer volume of projectiles blotting out the sun. The sound alone would be terrifying. The collective twang of bows followed by the rising crescendo of whistling shafts, culminating in a sickening thud as they struck shields, armour, or unfortunately flesh. Every inch of ground would be targeted, transforming a disciplined advance into a desperate scramble for cover. An arrow storm was a physical and psychological assault unlike almost any other. It inflicted wounds, certainly, often not immediately fatal, but enough to incapacitate, to bleed out, to spread panic. But more profoundly, it shattered morale. How do you maintain formation? How do you hold your nerve when your comrades are falling around you to an unseen enemy, when the very ground you walk on is suddenly bristling with deadly splinters, and when every breath you take might be your last, delivered by a distant, unseen hand? The constant, unremitting pressure of such a barrage could turn a confident advance into a hesitant crawl, then into a desperate rout, long before the front lines ever met in hand-to-hand combat. Yet, the true genius of archer deployment often lay not just in their independent capacity for destruction, but in their seamless integration into a larger, more complex strategic dance. The field of arrows was rarely an isolated event. It was a prelude, a carefully orchestrated overture to the main act. Consider the classic combined arms tactic. Archers unleash their tempest, shattering enemy formations, creating gaps, and sowing widespread confusion and demoralization. Then, at the precise psychological moment, when the enemy is reeling and scattered, heavy cavalry would thunder forward, or disciplined infantry would surge into the compromised lines. The archers had done the arduous work of softening the target, setting them up for the knockout blow. This coordination required incredible discipline and timing. Archers often maintained their fire, perhaps shifting targets to protect the flanks of charging cavalry, or providing suppressing fire as infantry closed the distance. It wasn't just about one unit performing well. It was about how each element amplified the others, creating a synergistic effect far greater than the sum of its parts. This sophisticated interplay of ranged and close-quarters combat turned a simple battle into a brutal, efficient machine, where the field of arrows was not just a destructive force, but the crucial first domino in a chain reaction leading to victory. The life of an archer, particularly a skilled one, was never just about the bow and arrow. It was also profoundly shaped by the complex tapestry of their remuneration. Unlike the conscripted peasant whose service was often tied to feudal obligation, the professional archer, especially during the later medieval period, was a commodity. Their perceived value dictated a fascinating array of payment methods. For some, particularly long-serving or highly esteemed individuals, this might mean a grant of land, a small holding that would support them and their family in exchange for their readiness to serve when called. This wasn't just payment, it was an investment in their continued loyalty and availability. More commonly, however, archers received daily wages. These wages, while seemingly straightforward, varied wildly depending on the archer's experience, the urgency of the campaign, and the wealth of their employer. A seasoned English longbowman during the 100 Years' War, for example, could command a respectable sum, often more than other foot soldiers, a testament to the devastating impact of their specialized skill. But beyond simple cash, there were often additional benefits. The promise of plunder from conquered territories, a share in ransoms for captured nobles, or even provisions of food and equipment. This varied compensation scheme wasn't arbitrary. It was a deliberate reflection of their critical role on the battlefield, a clear indicator that a well-funded, well-equipped archer could turn the tide of war. As warfare evolved, so too did the formalization of military service. Enter the system of indentures and contracts, especially prevalent for the burgeoning mercenary companies that became a staple of medieval and early modern conflicts. These weren't mere verbal agreements. They were intricate legal documents, often detailed on a single sheet of parchment, cut with a wavy or indented edge, with a matching copy held by the other party. These indentures laid out, in excruciating detail, the terms of service, the number of men to be supplied, their armaments, the duration of the campaign, the exact daily or monthly wages for each rank, provisions for supplies like food and transport, and even stipulations regarding loot and ransoms. For commanders like Sir John Hawkwood or other captains of the free companies, these contracts were their business plans, allowing them to market their military prowess as a professional service. Kings and nobles, on the other hand, used indentures to project their power and secure specific military capabilities without the lifelong obligations of feudal levies. It transformed what might appear as chaotic mercenary activity into a surprisingly structured, almost corporate enterprise. The success or failure of a campaign often hinged on the clarity and enforceability of these contractual agreements, marking a significant step towards the professionalization of armies. Yet these armies could not make war in the field all the time. Their survival often hinged on the strength of their fortifications and their castles. These were not just elaborate homes, they were the ultimate defensive bastions, designed with an intricate, almost obsessive attention to repelling an enemy. From their earliest, simpler forms, like the wooden motte and bailey structures, to the mighty concentric fortresses that dominated the later medieval landscape, every single architectural choice was a calculated move in a deadly game of chess, aimed at keeping attackers out and those within safe. The ingenuity wasn't just in the sheer mass of stone, but in the intelligent layering of defences, creating a multifaceted challenge for any besieging army. The heartbeat of any fortress wasn't the clang of the blacksmith's hammer or the rustle of silk in the lord's chambers. It was the rhythmic, almost imperceptible scuff of boots along the battlements, the soft whisper of a sentry's breath against the wind. Day in and day out, through seasons of sun and snow, the circulating patrols were the living, breathing perimeter of defence. Their duty, while often routine to the point of monotony, was absolutely crucial. Hour after hour they traced the well-worn paths atop the wall walks, their gaze sweeping the landscape, their ears attuned to every shift in the air. This wasn't just a walk, it was a ceaseless vigil, a quiet declaration that the castle was awake, watching and ready. Each guard became a living extension of the stone itself, a pair of eyes and ears that never truly rested, always scanning the horizon, the fields, the distant tree line for anything that might disrupt the fragile peace within the walls. The path they walked was a physical manifestation of their commitment, a testament to the fact that security was not a static state, but a constant dynamic effort, maintained by the vigilance of those who embraced the solitude and the weight of that unblinking stare. Their presence was a silent promise to all within. We are here, we are watching. Imagine standing at the threshold of a formidable castle, staring up at its primary entrance. This gatehouse, while architecturally designed to be the strongest point of the entire fortification, was paradoxically also its most critical vulnerability. It was the focal point, the chink in the armour that every attacker sought to exploit, and thus it became a marvel of elaborate defensive mechanisms. Every stone, every beam, every strategic opening was a testament to centuries of trial and error in the grim art of siege warfare. From its sheer, unscalable walls to the deep shadowed archway leading within, it was a gauntlet of death for anyone foolish enough to attempt a direct assault. Above, along the battlements flanking the gate, and within the machicolations that jutted out menacingly, archers stood ready, their quivers heavy, their eyes scanning the approach with unwavering intensity. These were not just random bowmen, they were seasoned defenders, trained to rain down a torrent of arrows, bolts, and even stones upon any intruder who dared to advance. The portcullis, a colossal grid of sharpened iron teeth, hung poised, a swift and brutal barrier designed to drop with bone-jarring force, crushing anyone trapped beneath or sealing off the passage with an impassable barrier. And then the true dread for any attacking force, the murder holes. Small, unassuming openings in the ceiling of the gate passage, these were channels for destruction through which defenders could unleash a hellish array of projectiles, heavy rocks, scalding water, boiling oil, or even quicklime, directly onto the heads of those trapped below. The sounds of a gatehouse under attack must have been deafening, the thud of siege engines, the twang of bowstrings, the shouts of men, and the chilling hiss of death descending from above. But even with these intricate layers of stone and iron, the gatehouse was only as strong as its keepers. The true guardian wasn't just the architecture, but the constant, unwavering human vigilance that prevented a surprise rush or an insidious infiltration. A moment's lapse in observation, a guard distracted by a distant bird or a sudden gust of wind, could be catastrophic. The entire garrison depended on the sharp eyes and quick reactions of those stationed at the gate. Guards worked in shifts, their senses dulled by repetition, yet always on edge, knowing that the fate of everyone within the walls rested squarely on their shoulders. It was a relentless psychological battle as much as a physical one, an unending test of endurance and focus against an enemy who might appear at any second, silently or with a roar. The responsibility was immense, the tension palpable, knowing that the survival of all, from the lowliest stable hand to the lord of the castle, hinged on their unbroken watch, their unwavering commitment to keeping the Iron Gate's secrets safe. Who were the people entrusted with this immense responsibility, standing guard in these remote, exposed positions, often for weeks or months on end? More often than not, it was the archer. Known for their keen eyesight, discipline, and ability to remain still and focused for extended periods, archers were the perfect candidates to staff these lonely outposts. Their role extended far beyond simply drawing a bowstring in defense. They were the human circuit breakers in this vast communication network. It was their sharp eyes that first identified the distant speck on the horizon. It was their judgment that determined if it was a genuine threat or a phantom, and it was their steady hand that would set the torch to the wood, initiating the chain reaction of signal fires that would awaken the realm. The archer in the watchtower was the ultimate gatekeeper of information, the first line of defense in a system that relied as much on human perception and courage as it did on stone and fire. By the very nature of their role, they were defined by movement and precision. Their attire wasn't about pageantry, it was a testament to practicality. Imagine the fabric rubbing as they draw a bowstring back to their ear. Any restriction, any snag, could mean the difference between hitting a target and missing it entirely. So, their clothing reflects this. Typically, you'd find them in a simple tunic, often made of linen or wool, depending on the climate and available resources. It's cut loosely enough to allow full range of motion in the shoulders and arms, but not so baggy as to get caught on anything. Paired with this are practical breeches or trousers, sturdy but not stiff, allowing for quick changes in stance or a sudden sprint. Footwear is equally critical. Robust leather boots, providing ankle support and good traction, whether they're scrambling over rocky terrain or standing firm on a muddy field. Sometimes, for added protection, an archer might don a light gambeson, a padded jacket essentially. This isn't the heavy plate armour of a knight. That would be counterproductive, weighing them down and restricting their draw. A gambeson offers a decent layer against glancing blows or the blunt impact of an arrow without turning them into a slow, clanking target. It's a careful balance, always weighing protection against the supreme need for agility. Every stitch, every layer, is chosen not for appearance but for how it facilitates the rapid, repeated movements essential to an archer's art. A bracer on their bow arm to prevent string slap is also a standard, unspoken part of this functional uniform. Unlike the glory-soaked image of massed longbowmen decimating armies in pitched battles, Night Watch archers operated in an entirely different realm. They were watchers first, fighters second. Stationed on castle walls, towers, and along siege perimeters, these men endured endless hours of scanning darkness, listening for movement, waiting for the moment when alertness could mean the difference between a successful sneak attack and a defended castle. During medieval sieges, besieging armies established constant night watches around their encampments and siege lines. The concept was elegant in its paranoia. Attackers fortified their own positions, built earthen embankments, and organized rotating sentries to prevent defenders from launching counterattacks under cover of darkness. These night watches included dedicated archers stationed at key points, ready to rain arrows down on any sortie attempt emerging from castle gates. They were essentially the medieval equivalent of perimeter security, and they took their role deadly seriously. Castle defenders faced the inverse problem. Sentries on castle walls, many of them archers, kept constant watch for the nocturnal approach of siege forces. Medieval chroniclers frequently documented nocturnal assaults where attackers would hide during daylight and launch surprise raids at night, specifically targeting the wall guards. The tactic was simple but effective. Weary men, darkness, and sudden arrows make for devastating results. Those defending archers had to remain alert through entire nights, knowing that a single moment of inattention could open their castle to disaster. The vulnerability of the night watch made it a tempting target. Invading armies would sometimes hide in nearby forests or valleys, then surge forward in darkness, with archers providing covering fire, while infantry scaled walls or battered gates. Defenders would respond with arrows of their own, but they operated from fixed positions. The archers on the walls essentially had to hold the line, while below them, sappers might be tunneling under the walls or siege towers were being wheeled into position. The night watch was constant, exhausting, and absolutely necessary. What made night watch duty particularly brutal was the equipment involved. Medieval archers carried bow, arrows, and sometimes crossbows, all weapons requiring active strength and concentration to use effectively in darkness. Unlike swordsmen or pikemen who could largely react to what came at them, archers had to be more proactive. A night watch archer might spend 6 or 8 hours essentially waiting to see shapes emerge from darkness, then snap into combat mode within seconds. The psychological drain was immense. The 100 Years' War provides some of the most documented examples of medieval night operations involving archers. English commanders, renowned for their use of the longbow, understood that night watches were critical to maintaining siege positions and preventing relieving forces from reaching besieged towns. During the lengthy siege of Calais in the 1340s, English archers maintained constant vigil, and the town's inability to receive reinforcements partly stemmed from the effectiveness of these night watches, preventing breakthrough attempts. Castle fortifications evolved specifically to support night watch operations. Watchtowers were designed to give archers elevated vantage points, crucial when trying to see movement in darkness. Arrow slits and murder holes allowed defenders to fire down on approaching enemies while remaining protected. The spaces between crenellations, the notches in castle battlements, provided cover and allowed archers to duck behind stone while knocking arrows, then rise up to loose them. These architectural features were refined over centuries specifically because commanders understood that the night watch was where many sieges would be decided. Perhaps most telling is how exhaustion shaped night watch culture. Medieval military records and chronicles frequently mention guards falling asleep on duty despite knowing the punishment, often death. The monotony of staring into darkness, combined with the human body's natural tendency to shut down after dark, created constant tension between alertness and survival. Commanders posted multiple archers at key positions partly for this reason. If one man succumbed to exhaustion, his companion could maintain the watch. The night watch archer was not the romantic hero of medieval warfare. He wasn't charging into battle or performing feats of legendary marksmanship. He was a tired man in darkness, fighting his own physiology as much as any potential enemy, with an arrow nocked and his eyes straining to see threat in shadow. But without those night watches, without archers maintaining constant vigilance while others slept, medieval sieges would have played out entirely differently. The night watch was where diligence prevented disaster, where a single archer's alertness could save an entire garrison. The annals of warfare are replete with stories, both celebrated and cautionary, that underscore just how much rested on this individual vigilance. Consider the siege that went on for months, defences holding firm only for a single guard, heavy-lidded from a long watch, to miss the subtle movement of a scaling ladder being silently raised against an obscure section of the wall. That one momentary lapse, that brief flicker of inattention, could mean the difference between victory and the brutal sack of a city. The attackers, having invested so much, capitalized on that sliver of opportunity, pouring through the breach, turning a stalemated struggle into a swift, devastating defeat. Conversely, think of the archer, cold and tired, whose gaze lingered just a moment longer on a clump of bushes near the river crossing, detecting a glint of moonlight on a helmet that shouldn't have been there. The sharp thwack of their arrow into the ground nearby, or perhaps even into the shoulder of an advanced scout, would be enough. The alarm would ring out, men would scramble to arms, and the carefully planned midnight strike, meant to be sudden and overwhelming, would be met with an organized, fierce resistance. The tables would turn. That single act of unwavering focus, that refusal to let weariness win, transformed an almost certain rout into a successful defense, securing not just a victory, but the very lives of those who trusted in their watch. The weight of an entire battle, often an entire war, could hinge on the alertness of one person holding a bow against the encroaching darkness. And there was much to keep our night watch archer busy. True, lasting peace was a rare commodity in the medieval world, an elusive dream more often than a lived reality. For many archers, life was a continuous cycle of preparation and conflict, punctuated by brief, uneasy lulls. Border skirmishes were a constant nagging threat, like a persistent cough that never quite goes away. These weren't always grand battles, but localized conflicts over a disputed pasture, a small village, or the rights to a fishing weir. Raiding parties would test the defences, probe for weaknesses, and often make off with livestock or grain, leaving destruction in their wake. These were not the wars history books primarily focus on, but they were the daily reality for countless individuals, shaping their lives and livelihoods. Lords and nobles might sign treaties, but the practicalities on the ground often meant a persistent state of low-level violence. A declaration of peace between kingdoms didn't magically erase years of animosity or the petty squabbles between neighbouring landowners. An archer couldn't afford to let down their guard. The very landscape of medieval Europe was a patchwork of shifting allegiances and simmering resentments. You might be training in the morning, mending your equipment in the afternoon, and by evening find yourself mustered to repel a sudden raid from a few miles away. This constant readiness, this expectation of conflict, seeped into every aspect of life. It fostered a suspicious outlook, a reliance on community defense, and a profound understanding that the world was, at its heart, a dangerous and unpredictable place, where the next fight was always just beyond the horizon, waiting to erupt. So, As we conclude our talk for tonight, spare a thought for the humble archer. He will never appear in the triumphant murals commissioned by kings, never have his name immortalized in chronicles penned by scribes sitting safely in monasteries. His deeds, however vital, are by nature invisible. There are no poems celebrating the night when he stayed awake, no songs about the watch he kept that prevented disaster. History doesn't tend to record the quiet victories of vigilance, the countless lives saved by an archer who simply did his job and didn't fall asleep. Yet that archer's vigil was just as real, just as consequential as any dramatic battle. Every silent night spent scanning shadows, every moment of hyperfocus listening for the snap of a twig, every arrow nocked in expectation, it all mattered. That archer was the difference between a town sleeping safely and a town burning. He was the reason families woke to see another sunrise. The medieval night watch archer operated in darkness, both literal and metaphorical. He bridged the gap between the romanticized warrior of daylight battles and the brutal realities of medieval defense. He understood that vigilance wasn't glamorous, that standing motionless for hours was harder than charging into combat, that the real threat often came not with fanfare, but with silence. When you next think of medieval warfare, of great sieges and legendary battles, remember there's another story running parallel to those grand narratives. It's a quieter story, one told in the language of creaking floorboards, whispered signals, and arrows released into darkness. It's the story of ordinary men with extraordinary responsibility, holding the line against the encroaching dark. And if you ever find yourself in an old castle, standing on a battlement as dusk falls and the world grows quiet, take a moment. Look out at the darkness creeping across the land. Imagine what it was like to stand that watch century after century. Then maybe you'll understand why those forgotten archers deserve to be remembered. That's the work of history. Not just learning what happened, but really seeing it. And that understanding deepens when we think through it together. So, if this video sparks something for you, share it in the comments. A question, an observation, a connection you've made. These conversations are where history comes alive. Subscribe to Medieval Grime if you're serious about understanding this era. We're exploring the complexity of medieval history, the political intrigue, cultural developments, and human stories that shaped our world. There's always more to uncover. We'll see you in the next one.